When we think of ancient Rome, we usually picture grand philosophy, incredible architecture, and, the foundations of law. But there's this much darker side, a kind of systemic, almost gleeful cruelty that's honestly shocking, even for the ancient world. So in this explainer, we're not just going to look at what the Romans did, but we're going to dig into a really chilling theory about what might have been, well, poisoning their minds.
All right, so picture this. The year is 94 AD. You are in the Coliseum, and you're surrounded by thousands of cheering, roaring people. Down on the arena floor, 30 men, they're malnourished, bruised, totally naked, and the crowd is just cheering at them. These men are condemned to die, and you've got a front row seat to the show.
Now, each man is strapped to one end of something called a Pitarum. Think of it as a giant wooden seesaw. In, happier times, these things were used by acrobats for innocent stunts. But today their purpose is something else entirely, something much, much more sinister.
All of a sudden, you hear this groan of scraping wood, the clanking of chains, and from openings in the arena floor, 20 lions are raised up into the sunlight, and they have been deliberately kept hungry just for this moment. They kind of pause, they sniff the air, their eyes lock onto the men, and then, with this deafening roar, they charge. And here is the horrifying genius of this Roman design. The men at the bottom of the seesaws, they panic. Of course they do. They leap into the air to try and escape the lion's jaws. But that act of self-preservation, it comes at a terrible cost, because their movement helplessly lowers the man on the other end right into the path of those hungry beasts. So every single man's struggle to survive is what actively causes another man's agonizing death. This perverse game, it only ends when the arena floor is splattered with 150 liters of blood. And the crowd? Oh, they're cheering, they're eating, they're laughing. They are literally placing bets on the gruesome spectacle that's unfolding right in front of them. And that just perfectly illustrates the core issue here. This was not some rare, shocking event. This was Roman entertainment. The empire's capacity for sadism wasn't a bug, it was a feature. It was deeply, deeply ingrained into the culture.
And they were so creative with their cruelty. I mean, take something called ponaculi. A person was sewn into a leather bag with a dog, a snake, and a rooster, and then just thrown into a river. They'd be bitten and clawed to death while they drowned. They industrialized crucifixion, leaving thousands to die these slow, public, agonizing deaths, just as a warning. Their big military victory parades, the triumphs, they often ended with the public strangling of an enemy leader. And even in their own army, discipline was kept through decimation, where soldiers were forced to bludgeon 1/10 of their own comrades to death.
Now, the crucial thing to understand is that this brutality was the law. If you were a Roman citizen, you had protections. But under what they called ius gentium, or the law of nations, foreign captives were legally no different from property. It didn't matter what your status was before. You could have been a queen. Now you could be beaten, sold or killed, all at your owner's whim.
This is exactly what happened to Queen Boudica. When she protested the Romans seizing her lance, they publicly flogged her and had Roman soldiers violate her daughters. Now, this wasn't just random violence. It was a calculated act of public degradation. It was designed to completely break her and her people. Well, it didn't work. Instead, it ignited a rebellion that almost drove the Romans right out of Britain. So that brings us to the big question, right? It's really easy to just say, oh, well, that's just how things were back then. But the thing is, Rome was brutal even by the standards of its own time. Sure, cultural and religious factors played a part, capricious gods, a might makes right philosophy, but what if there was something else going on? Something insidious, something invisible, maybe something in the water.
And this is where we dive into a really fascinating and pretty controversial theory. We're going to look past the usual explanations and explore this strange chemical possibility that might have made an already brutal society even worse.
I'm talking about lead poisoning. We know today that even sustained, low-level exposure to lead is incredibly toxic. It attacks your body, sure, but for our story, the important thing is that it attacks the mind. It can literally alter a person's personality, stripping away their empathy and ramping up aggression and impulsivity. In a word, it can create the traits that we associate with psychopathy.
And the Roman elite? They were practically swimming in lead. Their famous aqueducts brought water into the cities through lead pipes. The wealthy cooked their food in lead pots. They even sweetened their wine with something called lead acetate, a substance so toxic a single teaspoon could cause kidney damage. They even used cosmetics that had lead in them, which would have been absorbed right through the skin.
And this isn't just a guess. We have physical proof. A 2019 study looked at skeletons from Roman-era London and found that the lead levels were 20 to 40 times higher than in skeletons from before the Romans got there. That is a staggering increase. It's almost certainly enough to have caused serious, widespread health problems.
So let's connect the dots here. On one hand, you have a culture of just extreme, inventive sadism. On the other, you have hard, scientific evidence of chronic, widespread lead poisoning, especially among the urban and elite classes, the very people making the decisions.
Well, this suggests a pretty terrifying cycle. See, children absorb up to 5 times more lead than adults, and it can just devastate a developing brain. It's been linked to lower IQs and a higher tendency for violence and cruelty. Now imagine generations of these kids dosed with lead from birth, growing up to become the leaders of society. They, in turn, raise another generation in that exact same toxic environment. Over centuries, you could create a culture where this callous disregard for human life and impulsive, violent behavior just becomes the norm.
Okay, so let's be really clear about what this theory is and what it isn't. It is not saying that lead poisoning caused the fall of the Roman Empire. No way. Historians pretty much all reject that kind of simple explanation. The decline of Rome was incredibly complex, but what this theory does offer is a chillingly plausible factor in its legendary sadism. It's a hotly debated idea for sure, not a proven fact, but it is supported by the latest science, and it suggests that a simple metal might have just amplified the absolute worst impulses of the empire's ruling class.
And that kind of leaves us with one last unsettling thought. Rome's story really shows how an entire society's moral compass could be warped by a poison they didn't even fully understand. So it forces us to ask, if a simple metal could help corrupt an entire empire, what unseen forces, environmental, technological, maybe social, are shaping our own world in ways we can't yet see?